At the fancy business party, filled with sparkling decorations and expensive wine, a pregnant wife stood, shaking, as her husband's girlfriend threw cold coffee over her beautiful maternity outfit, while everyone in the room stared in shock. Her husband and his whole family started laughing cruelly, their mean laughter filling the big hall as she held the divorce papers with trembling hands, tears running down her face and ruining her makeup. What none of them knew, not her sneering husband, not his laughing family, not even the smirking girlfriend in her tight red dress, was that this embarrassed woman signing those papers was actually a trillionaire's younger sister, kept secret from the public for 26 years. The pen moved toward the signature line as something changed in her tear-filled eyes. A dangerous calmness replaced the pain, a change so small but so strong that the girlfriend's winning smile disappeared for just a moment. Would this pregnant wife simply walk away into the cold November night, accepting her defeat and public shame? Or would what she did next shock them all so badly that destruction would be the only word left to describe what happened to them? The Riverside Hotel's main party room glowed with hundreds of crystal lights, each one showing off the carefully displayed wealth of Chicago's upper-middle-class families. On November 15th, Emma Taylor stood near the dessert table, her 6-month pregnancy barely hidden under a beautiful blue dress that had cost her 3 months of salary from her nursing job. But her husband, Robert, hadn't noticed. He never noticed anymore.
Across the room, Robert Taylor got everyone's attention, like he always did, his arm wrapped tightly around Jessica Palmer's waist, while his business friends congratulated him on the upcoming business deal with Palmer Enterprises. Emma watched her husband of 4 years laugh at something Jessica whispered in his ear, the same ear where she'd whispered, "I love you," 1,000 times during their dating years, back when he'd been a struggling sales worker, and she'd believed in happy endings. What Emma remembered now, standing alone with one hand protecting her growing belly, was the night they'd met at a community center event 7 years ago. Robert had spilled coffee on her favorite book, an old copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and spent the whole evening saying sorry, buying her dinner, promising to replace it. She'd fallen for his honesty, his big dreams, his promises that he wanted a simple life with someone who valued love over money. She'd believed him when he'd proposed in that tiny apartment, promising that together they'd build something real, something that mattered more than wealth or status. But that Robert had disappeared the moment his career took off 3 years ago. This Robert, the one currently whispering closely with his girlfriend at their company's business party, was a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Emma, darling, you look positively glowing." Robert's mother, Linda Taylor, appeared beside her with a wineglass in hand and hatred in her eyes. "Though I must say that dress is quite bold for your current size. Jessica mentioned that blue makes women look washed out. She has such perfect taste, doesn't she?" Emma's fingers gripped her water glass tighter. Linda had never forgiven her son for marrying a nobody instead of someone from their social circle, conveniently forgetting that the Taylor family had only gotten their small wealth 2 generations ago through Linda's grandfather's furniture store chain. The irony wasn't lost on Emma, but she'd learned long ago that pointing out lies to people who benefited from them was useless. "The dress was a gift," Emma said quietly, thinking of the small package that had arrived last week from her brother's assistant. She rarely accepted anything from her brother, preferring to keep the independence she'd fought so hard for, but something had made her wear it tonight. Perhaps some part of her knew she'd need protection. "A gift? How lovely! From whom?" Linda's eyes gleamed with mean curiosity. Before Emma could answer, Robert's voice boomed across the party room, made louder by the microphone he'd taken from the DJ. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room went silent as 200 faces turned toward Robert Taylor, standing on the small stage with Jessica beside him, her hand resting on his chest in a way that made Emma's stomach turn. She knew what was coming, had known, really, since she'd found the divorce papers hidden in his office, already filled out, just waiting for his signature and hers. "I have an announcement to make this November evening," Robert continued, his voice carrying that practiced charm that once made her heart flutter, but now only made it sink. "As many of you know, Taylor Sales has been struggling to compete with bigger companies, but tonight I'm excited to announce that we're merging with Palmer Enterprises, securing our future and tripling our market value." Applause spread through the crowd. Emma remained frozen, watching her husband's face glow with greed and ambition, so different from the man who'd once told her that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. "But that's not the only change in my life," Robert continued, his eyes finally finding Emma across the crowded room. Something cold and cruel shone in them. "I'm also announcing that I'll be filing for divorce after the holidays, ending my marriage to Emma Taylor." The party room erupted in shocked whispers. Emma felt the walls closing in, felt 200 pairs of eyes staring at her, but she stood perfectly still, one hand on her belly where their daughter kicked, unaware of their parents' marriage ending. Jessica stepped forward, taking the microphone with practiced ease. "I know this seems sudden," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "but Robert and I have fallen deeply in love. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants, and we can't apologize for finding happiness together." Emma watched Jessica's performance with detached interest, noticing the way she stressed certain words, the way she turned her body toward the society reporters she'd clearly invited to document this moment. This wasn't sudden. This was planned, organized, designed for maximum embarrassment. "And honestly," Jessica continued, her mask slipping just slightly, "Robert deserves someone who can match his ambition, someone who understands the world he's building, not some small-town nurse who shops at discount stores and drives a 10-year-old Toyota." The laughter started with Robert's brother, Michael, a sharp bark that echoed through the marble halls. Then Linda joined in, her high-pitched laugh carrying notes of satisfaction. Within seconds, the entire Taylor family was laughing. Robert's father, William, his sister, Amanda, his cousins and aunts and uncles, all of them finding humor in Emma's public embarrassment. Emma's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction. She thought about her brother's warning 7 years ago when she'd told him she wanted to marry Robert without revealing her family's wealth. "You think you're testing his character," her brother had said, disappointment heavy in his voice. "But you're really just testing yourself. And when this fails, because it will fail, Emma, you'll have no one to blame but your own stubborn pride." She'd been so angry at him then, so certain that love could overcome money and status, that Robert's feelings for her were pure because he didn't know she was Alexander Chen's younger sister, family member of a business empire worth $3 trillion. She'd wanted to be loved for herself, not for her brother's fortune, and she'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for, a man who loved her when she had nothing and left her the moment someone wealthier appeared. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. "Emma," Jessica's voice cut through her thoughts, "we need your signature on the divorce papers. Robert was kind enough to have them prepared already. We'd like to make this official before the new year." Emma looked up to find Jessica approaching,
carrying an expensive leather folder that undoubtedly contained the legal documents that would end her marriage. Behind her, Robert watched with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of impatience and contempt that twisted something deep in Emma's chest. "The papers are very generous," Jessica continued, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she closed the distance between them. "Robert is offering you $50,000 in settlement despite the fact that you brought nothing to the marriage. No assets, no connections, just debt from your student loans. You should be grateful he's being so charitable." $50,000. Emma almost laughed at the absurdity. The necklace her brother had given her for her 21st birthday, currently locked in a safety deposit box she hadn't opened in years, was worth $50 million. The trust fund she'd refused to touch could buy Robert's entire company with pocket change. The apartment building where she rented her modest one-bedroom apartment was owned by her brother's real estate division, though she'd never told anyone. But these people didn't know that. They saw what she'd wanted them to see: a simple nurse, a poor girl who'd married above her station, a nobody who should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw her. Jessica reached her, holding out the leather folder with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just sign here, Emma. Make this easy on everyone." Emma took the folder with trembling hands, her vision swimming with unshed tears. She could feel the weight of 200 stares, could hear the whispered speculations, could sense the collective judgment of a room full of people who'd decided her worth based on her salary and her car. "Oh, how tragic," Linda's voice carried clearly across the room. "She's actually crying. Did she really think Robert would stay with her forever? A man like my son needs a partner who can elevate him, not drag him down." More ladder. Emma opened the folder, seeing her name typed next to Robert's on the official documents. 7 years of love, 4 years of marriage, reduced to legal terminology and financial settlements. Her hand shook as she reached for the pen Jessica offered. "Before you sign," Jessica said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I should mention that Robert and I will be announcing our engagement on New Year's Eve. Your daughter will have a stepmother who can actually provide for her, give her the life she deserves. Isn't that wonderful?"
Something cracked inside Emma's chest. A hairline fracture that had been forming for months, finally splitting wide open. Her daughter. Jessica was talking about her unborn daughter, already planning to replace Emma in every aspect of her child's life. The pen was inches from the paper when Jessica's phone rang. She glanced at it, irritation flickering across her face, but answered anyway. "This is Jessica Palmer?" "Yes. What do you mean the merger is... what?" Emma watched Jessica's face drain of color, watched her confident smile collapse into shock and confusion. Across the room, Robert's phone buzzed insistently, then Linda's, then William's. Within seconds, half the party room was checking their phones, their expressions shifting from amusement to bewilderment. "That's impossible," Jessica whispered into her phone, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. "Chen Global can't just... they wouldn't." Chen Global. Emma's pen froze above the signature line. Robert pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. "What's going on, Jessica? What's happening with the merger?" "It's canceled," Jessica said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "Chen Global just bought Palmer Enterprises completely. They're dissolving the company, absorbing the assets. The merger with your firm is void." The party room erupted in chaos. Robert's phone rang again, and Emma watched his face cycle through confusion, denial, and dawning horror as he listened to whoever was on the other end. His business, his future, his carefully constructed empire, all of it crumbling in real time. "That's not all," Jessica continued, staring at her phone screen as new messages flooded in. "Chen Global is also acquiring Taylor Sales. They're offering to buy you out completely, Robert, for pennies on the dollar.
It says here they have evidence of financial irregularities, breach of contract, fraud." "That's insane," Robert shouted, but his voice cracked with panic. "Who is doing this? Why would Chen Global even notice a company our size?" Emma stood perfectly still, the unsigned divorce papers forgotten in her hands. She'd thought about the phone call she'd made 3 days ago, the first time she'd contacted her brother in 4 years. She'd told him everything, about Robert's affair, about the divorce papers, about the girlfriend who had been calling her at home to brag. She hadn't asked for help. She never asked for help. But her brother had listened in silence, and then he said something that had puzzled her at the time. "You've spent 7 years proving you don't need my money, Emma, but you're still my sister, and you're carrying my niece. Let me show you what happens to people who hurt my family." She'd thought he meant lawyers, perhaps private investigators. She hadn't realized he meant total destruction. A new commotion erupted near the party room entrance. Emma looked up to see hotel security parting the crowd, making way for someone. The whispers grew louder. Urgent, shocked. "Is that? It can't be. Alexander Chen is here?" Her brother walked into the party room like a force of nature, his black hair perfectly styled, his custom suit worth more than everything in the room combined. At 45, Alexander Chen commanded the attention of world leaders and business giants, controlled industries that shaped global economics, and ruled a business empire that stretched across 6 continents. He was also, as Forbes confirmed just last month, connected to the world's first verified trillionaire family. And he was walking directly toward Emma. The party room fell into stunned silence as Alexander Chen stopped in front of his sister, his eyes softening in a way that few people ever witnessed. "Hello, little sister," he said quietly, reaching out to touch her face with a gentleness that contradicted his reputation as one of the most ruthless businessmen alive. Emma's tears finally fell, but they were different now. Relief mixed with love, mixed with the complex emotions of a sister who'd run from her brother's protection, only to find herself needing it desperately. "Alex," she whispered, "you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Alexander said firmly. Then he turned to face the room, his expression hardening into the mask that made Fortune 500 CEOs tremble. His eyes found Robert, who stood frozen with his phone still pressed to his ear, his face pale. "My sister called me 3 days ago, the first time in 4 years she reached out to me. Do you know why? Because her husband decided to embarrass her publicly while she's 6 months pregnant with his child. Because his girlfriend has been calling my sister at all hours, describing in detail how she'll replace her. Because this man's entire family has spent years treating my Emma like she's worthless." Linda Taylor made a sound like a strangled gasp. Alexander's eyes cut to her. "You laughed at my sister tonight. You mocked her dress, her car, her profession. You suggested she wasn't good enough for your son. Let me explain something to you, Mrs. Taylor. That blue dress Emma's wearing, it's a custom Versace worth $200,000. I had it made for her last month. The 10-year-old Toyota you all find so amusing, she drives it by choice, even though she has access to a fleet of vehicles worth more than your house. And her profession? My sister has a PhD in nursing from Johns Hopkins, which she earned while volunteering at free clinics because she actually cares about making a difference." Emma watched her former mother-in-law's face cycle through emotions, disbelief, horror, and finally devastating recognition. Linda's eyes dropped to the simple bracelet Emma always wore, the one she claimed was a family heirloom. It was a family heirloom, a flawless jade bracelet that had belonged to Emma's grandmother, worth approximately $40 million. "You're lying," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Emma would have told me. We were married. She wouldn't—" "Wouldn't what?" Alexander cut him off. "Wouldn't test whether you loved her for herself or her money? Wouldn't want to ensure your feelings were genuine? My sister has a romantic streak, Mr. Taylor. She believed in love, in authenticity. She thought that by hiding her background, she'd find someone who valued her for who she is, not what she has." He paused, his expression turning glacial.
She found you instead." Jessica had backed away, her triumphant smile long gone, replaced by dawning horror. "The merger," Jessica whispered. "Palmer Enterprises. You destroyed my family's company because of this?" "You destroyed your family's company because you thought it was acceptable to pour cold coffee on my pregnant sister at a business lunch," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "Yes, Miss Palmer, I know about your little stunt last week at the restaurant when you followed Emma to lunch and accidentally spilled an entire cup of iced coffee on her while she was eating with colleagues. She didn't tell me, my security team did. They've been watching her since she got married, making sure she was safe, making sure she was happy." He turned back to Robert, who had gone from pale to greenish. "You signed a prenuptial agreement before your marriage, Mr. Taylor. Do you remember what it said?" Robert nodded mutely. "It stated that in the event of divorce due to infidelity, the unfaithful party forfeits all assets acquired during the marriage and pays a penalty equal to 50% of their net worth to the faithful party," Alexander recited from memory. "You thought it was a standard document. You signed it without really reading it because you assumed Emma had nothing to protect. But that prenuptial agreement was drawn up by my lawyers, and it's ironclad." Emma watched her husband's face as the full weight of his situation crashed over him. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a hollow sadness for the death of the love she'd once believed in. "Your business is being acquired as we speak," Alexander continued. "Your personal assets are being frozen pending investigation into the financial fraud my team discovered. Real fraud, by the way, not fabricated charges. You've been stealing from your own company to fund your lifestyle and Jessica's expensive tastes. The evidence is already with the authorities." "This is insane," Robert said, but he was looking at Emma now, seeing her for the first time. She's actually my sister, Emma Chen Taylor, and you had the privilege of being married to her for 4 years, during which time she supported your dreams, believed in your potential, and loved you unconditionally. All she asked in return was loyalty and respect. You couldn't even give her that." Jessica lunged forward suddenly, her composure completely shattered, and before anyone could react, she grabbed a champagne bucket filled with ice water from a nearby table. "You manipulative liar!" she screamed, swinging the bucket toward Emma. "You played us all. You pretended to be poor while you were secretly rich, and now you're using your brother's money to destroy us." The ice water arced through the air in slow motion, but it never reached Emma. Alexander Chen moved with surprising speed, stepping between Jessica and his sister. The dirty water splashed across his expensive suit instead, ice cubes clattering against the marble floor. Security descended immediately, grabbing Jessica and pulling her away as she continued to scream. But Alexander ignored her, turning to Emma with concern. "Are you all right? Is the baby? Are they?" "We're fine, Alex," Emma said softly, placing a hand on his wet sleeve. "Thank you." The divorce papers were still in her hands, unsigned. Emma looked down at them, at Robert's signature already in place, at the space waiting for hers. She thought about the woman she'd been when she married him, young, naive, believing that love could overcome any obstacle. She thought about the woman she'd become, stronger, wiser, but still clinging to the hope that the man she'd married might still exist somewhere beneath the greed and ambition. He didn't. He never had. She'd been in love with potential, with promises, with the performance Robert had given because he thought she was his best option at the time. Emma picked up the pen and signed her name with steady hands. The marriage was over, but she wasn't devastated. She was free. "The settlement you offered was $50,000, Alexander said to Robert, who stood surrounded by his shocked family members. "How generous!" "Emma's counter-settlement, as stipulated by the prenuptial agreement, is 50% of your net worth. Once the criminal charges are settled and your debts are paid, I estimate that will be approximately -$7 million. My sister, however, is willing to be merciful. She'll waive the penalty if you sign over full custody of your daughter and agree never to contact either of them again."
"You can't do this," Linda Taylor said, but she was crying now, mascara streaming down her face just as Emma's had earlier. "You can't just destroy our family because you laughed when your son humiliated his pregnant wife at a business party, because you spent years making my sister feel worthless, because you threw a party to celebrate her divorce." He shook his head. "Mrs. Taylor, I'm not destroying your family. Your son did that when he chose greed over love. I'm simply ensuring he faces consequences for his choices."
Emma watched Robert sign the custody agreement with shaking hands. She watched Jessica being escorted from the party room by security. She watched the entire Taylor family slowly realize that their lives would never be the same, that crossing Alexander Chen's sister had cost them everything they'd worked for. But she felt no joy in their downfall, only exhaustion and a deep, profound relief that it was over. "Let's go home, little sister," her brother said gently, offering his arm. "Sarah is waiting. She's been worried sick about you." Emma took his arm, turning away from Robert and his family and the wreckage of her marriage. As they walked through the silent party room, guests parted like water, their earlier judgment replaced by shock and fear and the dawning realization that they'd witnessed something unprecedented. At the doorway, Emma paused and looked back one final time. Robert stood alone in the center of the party room, surrounded by his family but completely isolated, staring at the divorce papers in his hands as if they might somehow rewrite themselves. "I loved you," Emma said quietly, knowing he couldn't hear her from this distance, saying it more for herself than him. "I really did. I hope someday you understand what you lost. Not the money. You never knew about the money. But you lost the chance to be loved by someone who would have given you everything that mattered, and you traded it for things that matter not at all." Then she turned and walked out into the cold November night, her brother's arm supporting her, heading toward a future where she would raise her daughter surrounded by people who valued love over status, character over wealth, and family over everything else. Behind them, the business party continued in shocked whispers and frantic phone calls, but Emma didn't look back again. She was done with that chapter of her life, done with proving herself to people who'd already decided her worth based on superficial measures. The night air was crisp in Chicago, covering the city in darkness, and Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that her daughter would grow up knowing her worth. Hope that she would teach her child that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the strength of character and the depth of love. Hope that the scars from this marriage would heal into wisdom rather than bitterness. "Sarah wants to know if you'll come for Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow," her brother said as they reached his car, where a driver waited with an umbrella. "She's making your favorite honey-glazed turkey with those tiny, ridiculous potatoes she insists on making from scratch." Emma smiled through her tears. "I'll be there, Alex. We both will." She placed a hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick as if in agreement. Alexander Chen smiled, the ruthless businessman disappearing completely as he looked at his sister with undisguised love and pride. "She's already strong, just like her mother, and she'll grow up knowing exactly how valuable she is because we won't let her forget it." They drove away from the Riverside Hotel, leaving behind the devastation of broken dreams and shattered illusions, heading toward a future built on truth rather than pretense. And if Emma cried herself to sleep that night, it wasn't from devastation, it was from relief, from release, from the freedom that came with finally accepting that some people would never see her value, no matter how she presented herself. The next morning, on Thanksgiving Day, Emma woke to find her brother had left the morning newspapers outside her childhood bedroom door.
Every major publication carried the same story. Chen family reveals secret marriage ends union after public humiliation. The articles detailed Robert's fraud, Jessica's assault, the spectacular collapse of the merger, and the Taylor family's complete financial ruin. But Emma barely glanced at them. She was too busy feeling her daughter kick, too focused on the future, too grateful for the family that had never stopped loving her, even when she'd pushed them away. 3 months later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Sophie Chen. The Taylor part would be legally removed before Sophie's first birthday. Robert signed away his parental rights without protest, too buried in legal troubles to fight for custody of a daughter he'd never wanted anyway. And if sometimes Emma still thought about the man she'd married, about the promises he'd made and broken, she no longer felt devastated by his betrayal. Instead, she felt grateful that she discovered his true nature before wasting another year, another decade, another lifetime on someone who'd never deserved her love in the first place. The business party at the Riverside Hotel became legendary in Chicago social circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging people based on appearances, about the cost of cruelty, about the consequences of mistaking quiet strength for weakness. And whenever anyone asked Emma about that night, she would smile softly and say only this: "I learned that devastation isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes you have to watch everything fall apart before you can rebuild something better." Her daughter Sophie would grow up strong and sure, knowing her worth from birth, raised by a mother who'd learned the hard way that true value comes from within, that love should never require you to diminish yourself, and that sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is the clarity that comes from having everything stripped away. And on quiet nights, when Sophie was asleep and the city lights twinkled outside her window, Emma would think about that November evening and smile, not because she'd won, but because she'd survived, learned, and emerged stronger than before. That, she decided, was the real victory.
5 years, the Chen Foundation's annual Thanksgiving Gala had become Chicago's most anticipated charitable event, but not for the reasons most people expected. While other galas flaunted excess and exclusivity, Emma Chen's foundation focused on substance over spectacle, raising hundreds of millions of dollars for healthcare programs in underserved communities while maintaining an atmosphere of genuine warmth rather than performative philanthropy. Emma stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, watching her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, twirl across the marble floor in a simple red velvet dress, laughing as she danced with her uncle. The little girl had Alexander Chen's sharp intelligence and Emma's kind heart, but she possessed something neither of them had managed at her age, an unshakable confidence in her own worth that came from being raised with both truth and love. "Mommy, look," Sophie called out, executing a wobbly pirouette that made Alexander beam with pride. "Uncle Alex taught me to spin." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with an emotion she'd once thought she'd never feel again after that devastating November 5 years ago. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The past 5 years had transformed her in ways she couldn't have imagined that cold night when her marriage had imploded so spectacularly. She'd returned to nursing, but on her own terms, establishing a network of free clinics that provided excellent health care completely free to patients from low-income families. She'd reconnected with her family, building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than rebellion or obligation. And she'd learned that the opposite of devastation wasn't triumph, it was peace. "Emma Chen?" A hesitant voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find a woman in her early 40s, elegant in a navy gown that screamed old money,
but her expression carried genuine nervousness rather than the usual social calculation. Emma recognized her immediately. Catherine Ashford, owner of the hotel where her marriage had ended so publicly. "Mrs. Ashford," Emma said warmly, extending her hand, "thank you for hosting us tonight. The ballroom looks magnificent." Catherine shook her hand, relief flooding her features. "I wanted to apologize, actually, for that night 5 years ago. I was the event coordinator, and I should have intervened when things got out of hand. I should have stopped what was happening to you, but I was worried about offending the Taylor family's business connections. I've regretted my cowardice ever since." Emma studied the woman's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than the opportunistic apologies she'd received from countless social climbers over the years. "You weren't responsible for other people's cruelty, Mrs. Ashford, but I appreciate the apology nonetheless. I've followed your foundation's work. My daughter attended one of your healthcare programs last year. She's at Northwestern now studying medicine. Without your clinics, she never would have had that opportunity. So I wanted to say thank you and to tell you that what happened to you that night, it changed how I run my business. I don't allow people to use my venues for public humiliation anymore, regardless of how much money they're spending." Before Emma could respond, a small commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing a figure Emma hadn't seen in 5 years. Robert Taylor, looking far older than his 38 years, his once confident bearing replaced by the hunched shoulders of a broken man. The ballroom fell silent as people recognized him. Emma felt her brother tense across the room, saw hotel security moving subtly into position, but Emma raised her hand to stop them. Sophie had noticed the sudden quiet and pressed against her uncle's leg, her child's intuition sensing adult tension. Robert approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. He wore an off-the-rack suit that Emma recognized from a department store sale, his shoes scuffed, his face etched with lines that spoke of hard years and harder lessons. This wasn't the arrogant man who'd humiliated her at a business party. This was someone else entirely.
"I don't expect you to speak to me," Robert said quietly, his voice lacking the smooth charm she remembered. "I don't deserve that courtesy. But I've been trying to get the courage to do this for 3 years, and I finally realized that if I didn't do it now, I never would." Emma remained silent, watching him with the calm detachment she'd cultivated through years of therapy and healing. She felt no anger toward this man anymore, no hurt, only a mild curiosity about what could have brought him here. "I spent 2 years in federal prison for the fraud charges. Another year in court-mandated therapy. I lost everything: my business, my family's respect, any chance at the career I'd spent my life building. Jessica left me before the trial even started. Of course, she married a hedge fund manager 6 months later." He paused, his eyes drifting to where Sophie stood with her uncle, both of them watching him with identical expressions of protective wariness. Is that her? Our daughter?" "My daughter," Emma corrected gently but firmly. "You signed away your rights, remember. Sophie doesn't know you exist, and I'd prefer to keep it that way unless you have a compelling reason why she should." Robert flinched at the words, but nodded. "You're right. I have no claim to her. I just wanted to see her, to know that she's happy and healthy. She looks like you, beautiful and strong." "Why are you here, Robert?" Emma asked, not unkindly, but with clear boundaries. "This is a charity gala. I'm assuming you didn't pay the $50,000 entry fee." "I work here," Robert said, and Emma saw genuine humility in his expression for the first time ever. "I'm the assistant night manager. Started as a janitor 3 years ago, worked my way up. Mrs. Ashford gave me a chance when no one else would hire me, and I've been trying to prove I deserve it ever since."
Catherine Ashford had quietly appeared at Emma's side. "He's been an excellent employee," she said softly. "Hardworking, honest, and humble. When I learned about his past, I almost fired him, but he was upfront about everything. He's never asked for special treatment or tried to trade on his former connections. He just works quietly and diligently, and he's genuinely tried to become a better person." Emma looked at Robert with new eyes, seeing past the ruins of the man she'd married to someone who'd actually faced his failures and tried to change. It didn't erase what he'd done, didn't repair the damage he'd caused, but it suggested that devastation had taught him what prosperity never could. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," Robert said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "I don't deserve that, and I'm not sure I ever will. I came to say that I was wrong about everything, about you, about what mattered, about what success actually means. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too stupid and greedy to recognize its value. And I'm sorry. Not because I want anything from you. I know that ship sailed 5 years ago, but because you deserve to hear it. You deserved a lot of things I never gave you." Emma felt something shift in her chest, the last residual weight of that November night finally lifting. She'd thought she'd forgiven Robert years ago, but she realized now that true forgiveness required acknowledging growth, recognizing that people could change even if they couldn't undo their mistakes. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I appreciate the apology, and I'm glad you're rebuilding your life with integrity. That takes courage. I saw what you did with the settlement money. The prenuptial agreement said you could take everything, but you only took what was needed to cover my debts and legal fees. You could have destroyed me completely the way I tried to destroy you, but you chose mercy instead. That's when I finally understood the difference between us. You had real wealth, the kind that money can't buy, and I was too blind to see it." Sophie had grown bored with the adult conversation and tugged on Emma's hand. "Mommy, can we do the cake cutting soon? You promised I could help with the special announcement." Emma smiled down at her daughter, this miraculous little human who'd been born from devastation and raised in love, who would grow up knowing her worth because her mother had learned to know hers. "In just a few minutes, sweetheart. Go dance with Uncle Alex one more time, okay?" As Sophie skipped away, Emma turned back to Robert. "I hope you find happiness, Robert. Real happiness, not the kind that comes from status or money or other people's approval, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and being content with that person." "I hope so too," Robert said quietly, "and I hope Sophie grows up knowing how lucky she is to have you as her mother. I hope she never takes that for granted the way I took you for granted." He turned to leave, but Emma called after him. "Robert, for what it's worth, I don't regret marrying you. You taught me important lessons about myself, about love, about the difference between what I thought I wanted and what I actually needed. Those lessons were painful, but they were valuable. So thank you for that, at least." Robert's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You're a better person than I ever deserved, Emma. I hope someday I can be half as good as you always were." He disappeared into the crowd, returning to whatever duties he had as assistant night manager, and Emma watched him go with something close to peace. The man who devastated her 5 years ago no longer existed. He'd been broken down and rebuilt into someone humbler, wiser, diminished in worldly terms, but perhaps enriched in ways that actually mattered. Alexander Chen appeared at her side, Sophie riding on his shoulders like a conquering princess. "Are you all right, little sister? I was ready to have security remove him, but you seem to want to handle it yourself." "I'm fine, Alex," Emma assured him, reaching up to squeeze her small hand. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" Her brother's eyebrows rose in surprise. Grateful that I get to build Sophie's life on truth instead of deception. Grateful that she'll grow up knowing her worth without having to test it against people who can't see it. Grateful that I learned these lessons now instead of wasting decades on the wrong path. Emma smiled up at her daughter, and grateful that the worst night of my life led me to the best years of my life.
The evening continued with speeches and dancing, with the announcement that the Chen Foundation had raised $200 million for healthcare programs, with Sophie's delighted participation in cutting a massive cake shaped like a stack of books. Emma watched it all with contentment, surrounded by people who valued substance over surface, who measured success in lives changed rather than dollars accumulated. Later that night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in the car ride home and Emma had tucked her into bed, she stood in her daughter's doorway, watching the little girl sleep. Sophie clutched a stuffed panda, a gift from her uncle, and smiled in her dreams, utterly secure in her place in the world. Emma thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, standing in a different ballroom with cold coffee dripping down her dress and divorce papers in her shaking hands. That woman had thought she was being devastated, destroyed, publicly humiliated beyond recovery. But devastation, Emma had learned, was just another word for transformation. Everything had to fall apart so it could be rebuilt stronger, truer, more authentic. The marriage had to end so the real relationships, the one between a mother and daughter, between a woman and her family, between someone lost and the person they were meant to become, could begin. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister-in-law. "Sophie was absolutely radiant tonight. So were you, darling. Alex and I are so proud of the woman you've become, the mother you are, the difference you're making. Love you endlessly." Emma typed back a simple response. "Love you too. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." She thought about Robert working the night shift at the hotel, rebuilding his life one honest day at a time. She thought about Jessica, who'd apparently cycled through 3 marriages in 5 years, still chasing wealth and status and finding neither happiness nor peace. She thought about the Taylor family, scattered and diminished, learning too late that cruelty carries a cost that compounds over time. But mostly, she thought about Sophie, this miracle child who'd been conceived in a dying marriage but born into unconditional love, who would grow up strong and sure, who would change the world not because she came from wealth, but because she'd been raised with values that transcended it. "Thank you," Emma whispered into the quiet room, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. God, fate, the universe, or simply the mysterious forces that turn devastation into redemption. "Thank you for breaking me down so I could build myself back up. Thank you for showing me what I was worth when I'd forgotten. Thank you for Sophie, and for second chances, and for the wisdom that comes from surviving things you thought would destroy you." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall over Chicago, blanketing the city in white, just as it had 5 years ago. But this time, Emma watched it with joy rather than tears, with hope rather than despair, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been devastated and discovered that she was stronger than the forces that tried to break her. The business party that ended her marriage had also freed her to become the woman she was meant to be, not defined by her husband's approval or society's judgment, but by her own values, her own choices, her own understanding of what truly mattered. And as Emma finally climbed into her own bed, exhausted but content, she smiled at the thought that the greatest revenge against those who tried to devastate her wasn't their financial ruin or social disgrace. It was her own happiness, her own success, her own peace. Because in the end, the best response to cruelty wasn't retaliation, but transformation. Not vengeance, but victory over the parts of yourself that allowed the cruelty in the first place. She'd been devastated 5 years ago, but she'd also been reborn.
In that, Emma decided, as she drifted off to sleep, made all the difference.
10 years after that fateful November night, Emma Chen stood on the stage of the Chicago Convention Center, accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her work in healthcare reform. Sophie, now 15 years old, sat in the front row beside her Uncle Alex and Aunt Sarah, beaming with pride at her mother. The girl had grown into a remarkable young woman, confident, compassionate, and driven by a genuine desire to make the world better. She volunteered at her mother's clinics every weekend, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had already been recruited by several Ivy League universities, despite being only a sophomore in high school. But more importantly, Sophie had never questioned her worth. She'd grown up knowing she was loved unconditionally, knowing that her value came from who she was rather than what she had, knowing that strength meant lifting others up rather than tearing them down. My mother taught me that devastation can be a beginning rather than an ending, Sophie had written in her college entrance essay, which she had shared with Emma just last week. She showed me that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. And what really matters is never the things we can buy, but the people we love and the difference we make in their lives. Reading those words, Emma cried happy tears. Her daughter had learned the lessons that Emma had taken decades to understand, and she'd learned them without having to experience the same pain. As Emma delivered her acceptance speech, she spotted a familiar face in the back of the auditorium. Robert Taylor, now in his late 40s, stood quietly near the exit, his hands clasped in front of him. He'd come, she realized, not to insert himself into her triumph, but simply to witness it from afar, to see the woman he'd once tried to diminish now being honored by the nation's highest civilian award. Their eyes met for just a moment. Emma nodded slightly, not in forgiveness, because that had been granted years ago, but in acknowledgement that his cruelty had inadvertently set her on a path that led to this moment, that his worst had brought out her best, that his betrayal had taught her truths she might never have learned otherwise. Robert nodded back, a small, sad smile on his face, and then he slipped out of the auditorium, returning to whatever quiet life he'd built for himself. In closing, Emma said into the microphone, her voice strong and clear, I want to say to anyone who's ever felt worthless, who's ever been told they don't matter, who's ever been devastated by someone they trusted, you are more than their cruelty, you are more than their judgment, you are more than their inability to see your value. And sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is the destruction of everything you thought you needed, so you can discover everything you actually are. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Sophie's applause was the loudest of all. That night, as Emma lay in bed with her medal on the nightstand and her daughter asleep down the hall, she thought one final time about that November evening 10 years ago, the worst night of her life and, paradoxically, the best thing that had ever happened to her. She'd signed those divorce papers with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, believing her life was ending. She hadn't realized it was just beginning, and she fell asleep smiling, grateful for every moment, the painful ones and the joyful ones, the devastation and the redemption, the ending that had been a beginning all along.